Hey, this is a quick video, guys. This has been requested a bunch on what I spent on my swap. So let me talk through what I spent and the variables here and how you might do it differently in the future. Just as a reminder, I got my engine and transmission from a junkyard, a Gen 3 L59 and a 4L60E transmission. And I used my Jeep transfer case. And there are a million different ways you could do this differently and save a bunch of money. You learn something every time you do something. I learned a lot through this process, and I don't regret the way I did it. But if you'd like to do it cheaper than I do, I'm going to help you do it. So first of all, I had Novak modify my wiring harness. I got my wiring harness from the junkyard, and it was a complete pullout. Novak modified it to pull out the stuff that I didn't need, add things I did need, like fan relays, a new fuse block, etc. This is 730 bucks. There's a million people online who say you can do it yourself. I know you can. I've seen it done online. It will take time and effort, but you can do it yourself. I didn't want to mess with the wiring, so I paid Novak to do it. 730 bucks. This next one is specific to adapting the 4L60E to the Jeep 231 transfer case. If you're staying with a manual transmission or you're planning to use a GM transfer case, then you won't need this part. I chose to use a automatic transmission from a GM and my Jeep transfer case. If we'll talk about this later, but if you ended up going with a donor vehicle with a complete drivetrain, maybe you just want to keep the transmission and the transfer case the same. There are complications with that we can talk about, but you would save this adapter. If you keep your manual transmission, then you would still have to have a bell housing adapter and I think a new clutch assembly. So you would have some cost there, but you wouldn't have this specific cost. Next one is the radiator. I've seen people use cheaper radiators and say they work just fine. This one is from Novak. It's $600. It's a quote unquote high efficiency crossflow radiator. This is what I went for. I went through Novak for most of my parts, mainly because I know they know what fits and what doesn't, and I wanted them to be able to be a resource if I needed them. So the top part all the way through shipping is all Novak parts. The next was the AC relocation bracket from Holley. This was to prevent notching the frame to run air conditioning. If you don't want to run air conditioning or you want to notch your frame, you don't need this. This was to move the compressor from the bottom left where it's stock on the GM application to the top left where I use it in the Jeep. It's expensive, 550 bucks to do it. I wanted to do it like this. Then you have headers. I've seen people online say that you can find OEM headers like from a Camaro or something. I didn't do much research on this. I just bought the $350 headers from Novak and painted them with ceramic paint, made it work for me. This next one was the automatic shifting linkage. If you had an automatic transmission, you might not need this. I went from a manual to an automatic, so I had to have shifting linkage. This was 340 bucks from Low Car, and that's what I had to do. Next is a fan and shroud for the radiator. I'm positive you can do it cheaper than this. This is Novak's fan, and it was integrated with their radiator when they shipped it to me, 306 bucks. Next is fuel. This is what takes out the Jeep regulator, which is takes the PSI down to work for the Jeep, and it boosts it up for the GM, $280. And I've seen people use the just stock Jeep fuel pump, and I think that runs at too low of pressure, but it seems like it would work theoretically. Or I've seen people use the GM fuel pump and has to adapt it for the hole that is the Jeep tank. So I went with what Novak recommended, and it was 280 bucks. Next is engine mounts. You're going to need some type of engine mounts. I've heard a guy online say you can make these yourself. I don't know. He did it on a Montero. I bought mine 200 bucks from Novak. There are several other people that make them. Again, like I said, I bought everything from Novak. Next one is this ran my tachometer on my Jeep. This was because I wanted to keep my stock gauges. If you want to go aftermarket gauges, you probably don't need this. But then again, you'd have to buy the new gauge set, which I think is 600 or 700, 800 bucks. But you wouldn't need this. This runs my tachometer from my GM engine to my Jeep cluster. The next is somebody to program your computer, your GM computer. I used Novak to do that. I think there are a bunch of people online that can do that. I don't know that you can do this yourself. 175 bucks. Next is the cold air intake. For sure you could do this yourself. Having gone through it now myself, I think you could save money here very easily by buying your own setup. You can watch my video on how Novak sends it, and you can probably recreate that fairly easily. Same with the automatic transmission cooler lines. Again, this was only because I did an automatic transmission swap, so not really part of an LS swap. But I would have redone these. I would have done these myself instead of buying them from Novak. This was, again, with the AC relocation brackets, $107 for all the variables I mentioned above. You may not need this. The next was the transmission cooler. Once again, because I went to an automatic transmission, and I think you could buy this separately by yourself online. Fairly easy to research that and buy that. You don't have to get it from Novak. Next is a GM ECM mounting bracket. Easy, it's 84 bucks. Could you save the money and do it another way? Absolutely, you could. Overflow tank for the radiator, 50 bucks. You can buy it on Amazon. It's the same one. It's probably cheaper than buying it from Novak. This is a way you can save money. The evap relocation kit was to make it not so tall. I didn't need it, didn't use it, wasted 40 bucks. Transmission mount for $34. I think you could use, I've not heard that you can use the original GM transmission mount. Maybe you can. This was 34 bucks. I think it's worth it. Again, not needed if you're not doing a transmission swap. This was a harness and plug for the 231. I don't think I used this. This was related to the SYE because I did a slip yoke eliminator that I'm not including in here because that's irrelevant to my transmission swap, as well as I upgraded my transfer case shifting linkage, which had nothing to do with my transmission swap. The GM oil level sensor is just a bolt. I wouldn't get it. I just use the GM oil level sender that's already there to plug the hole. Shipping is what shipping is from Novak. As I mentioned, I got my engine, transmission, and wiring harness from a junkyard. This is where you can for sure save money if you were to buy a donor vehicle for somewhere around this price that had the engine, the transmission, and maybe even the transfer case, and you could part out that vehicle, sell the seats and sell the bed and sell the whatever. You can probably make money on this proposition. I didn't want a junk vehicle in my taking up space in my driveway, having to sell parts and deal with bozos online trying to buy my pieces. So I just went straight to a junkyard and got a full drivetrain, except for the transfer case. If you're on a budget and you want to do it cheaper than I did, for sure buy a donor vehicle and part it out. And that'll come into play later when I talk about all the sensors that I didn't get from the junkyard. I did sell my 4.0 and transmission and front drive shaft for about $1,000. Maybe you can make more, maybe you could make less, but you can for sure sell that unless it's completely blown up. Mine was in decent shape, had 125,000 miles on it. I had to get new drive shafts. I didn't have to get a new front drive shaft. I chose to because it was in rough shape. I sold it though. My rear drive shaft, since I did an SYE, my stock drive shaft was not going to work. So I got Tom Woods drive shafts. If you're not doing an SYE, you can shorten the rear and elongate the front with a shop and for sure save money here. This was 670 bucks. Tom Woods is good stuff and very friendly, good customer service, but expensive. My exhaust, I paid a shop $700. That included 2 catalytic converters and a muffler. Lots of people know how to do that themselves. I don't. You could easily save money if you're going to piecemeal your own exhaust together. HVAC install, I don't think you could do this yourself. I found a company that did it for 650 bucks. That was a new dryer and new lines, keeping all the stock pressure switches and ports. I think that's money well spent. If you're not using AC, you're in a northern state where you don't want AC, that's 650 bucks you could just save. Motor mount welds, I paid a guy to come weld my motor mounts in. I didn't want to do it. I've never welded. In hindsight, probably could have borrowed a welder, bought a welder, and done that myself. It's not very intimidating, and you could save some money there. I didn't want to mess with it. but if you're trying to save money, you probably know how to weld anyway. You can just do it yourself. All right, sensors, these added up. Some of these oil pressure and coolant temp, those were for the Jeep gauges, and I should have gotten it from my 4.0 before I sold it, but I didn't, so I had to buy new ones. The O2 sensors, the MAF sensor, the vent valve, and the fuel tank pressure were all for the GM, and I didn't get them from the junkyard, and I should have. That money right there should be moot point. You should not have to spend that money. Make sure you have all the sensors off of the donor vehicle. Again, if you have the donor vehicle, easy peasy. If you're getting it from a junkyard or from a third party, make sure you get some of these or account for the fact that you got to buy new sensors, and they're not cheap. Fluids you will need. Transfer case, it's because I did the SYE, but it's a good time probably to change it anyway. Transmission, new oil, because I had it rebuilt. We'll talk about that in a second. Engine oil you'll need, obviously. Engine coolant you'll need, obviously. Power steering, mine leaked out. So you're going to need some fluids. I'm going to skip over the miscellaneous. I'm going to go to trans rebuild. This was because my 4L60E needed a new output shaft to mate to the 231J Jeep transfer case. If you're using a GM transfer case, you won't need that. My transmission rebuild would have been cheaper, but I had it upgraded to be stronger, and so $700. If you're not doing transmission swap, or if you're keeping the GM transfer case, you won't need that. Then it's the miscellaneous. I did not add all this up. I don't know if it was more or less than $500, but it's close. I had to buy wire loom to make my electrical connections nice and neat. I bought lugs. I bought electrical wire like the 4 gauge and the 2 gauge for the battery lines. I broke a fuel line clip in the back when I took the fuel tank out. You'll probably break something when you do yours too. I had to buy a bunch of gasket maker for the SYE, for the fuel tank pressure sender. I had to buy a lug crimp tool to make my battery terminals because that was way cheaper than buying them. I bought battery terminals, the actual terminals for the battery. Had to get a new fuel pump seal when I did the fuel pump modifications. New fuel lines that I made. The Jeep zip tie things for the engine compartment to make the wiring neat. I had to buy the fuel pump spanner wrench to make it easy to take off the fuel pump. You don't need that, but from what I've heard, it's a pain without it. I had to buy new gaskets. I bought a new intake manifold gasket, throttle body gasket, oil pan gasket. You don't necessarily need those, but it probably would be a good idea. I had a broken header bolt, so I bought those. I broke 2 oil pan bolts, so I bought those. I've already talked about the oil pressure. I bought a new vacuum line for the Jeep because I cut mine inadvertently, so I had to buy a new replacement one. I got a Vortec badge to, show the world that I've got a 5.3 liter in the Jeep, not a necessity. Sound dampening, the tonneau cover that I bought and the holes from the transmission shifter linkage allowed a lot of heat and a lot of sound to come in the cab, so I had to buy that to make it quieter. Had to buy new coolant hoses, bought new knock sensors because while you've got the engine apart, why not? Bought new spark plugs, new spark plug wires, ceramic paint for the headers, engine paint for the engine and valve covers. Got to get an engine belt, and then I got that GenRight tonneau cover since I went from a manual to an automatic. Grand total, $10,127. I'd say the benefit of that is I had a really easy time installing. I've seen others online do this on a budget, and it's a lot of fabrication and a lot of trial and error that you might not know if it's going to work, especially the wiring. So do I regret the way I did this? No. Can you do this much, much cheaper? Yes, you can. There's somewhere in between where you could probably do this with a donor vehicle and still buy some of the expensive parts and end up being maybe 6,000, 7,000. I don't know. I'm just kind of shooting from the hip here. Or you keep the manual transmission and you do it way cheaper. I wanted an automatic transmission. You could do it to super budget and part all these things individually, get the donor, part it out, and do your own wiring harness, not do the transmission rebuild. Hell, you could probably make money on this swap if you did the donor vehicle right. So it's hard to say how much it costs. Mine was an engine swap, transmission swap from a manual to an automatic, and I did an SYE. So there were some more expensive things involved in mine, but it's way cheaper than having a shop do it, that's for sure. and I learned a lot along the way. One day I probably will buy a JK and I'll do this again, and I think I'll be far more efficient and it will be cheaper. So I hope that helps. That's me. That's my journey. I've got plenty of updates to come on the Jeep. If you like this, I've not asked this before, if you'll like and subscribe. There's been about 7,000 people watch my videos, and I've got about 300 subscribers. So maybe I should say it every video to like and subscribe. But I really like just sharing my journey, and if it helps you, I'm thrilled about that. And every project will be unique. So I'm really happy with mine, and I hope this helps you. Peace out.